So, what happens when the entire world's energy system has a heart attack? We're going to dive into a pretty chilling and, frankly, very plausible scenario. It's set in 2026, where a regional war triggers a complete paralysis of global energy and ends up rewriting the rules of global power. And look, this is not just some market downturn we're talking about. This is a systemic collapse, a sudden violent shock that's triggered by the closure of a single, absolutely vital artery of world trade. And the cause? A physical blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. For anyone who needs a quick refresher, the Strait of Hormuz is that narrow strip of water connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Just think of it as the jugular vein for the global economy. It's the one and only route for a massive flow of oil and gas to get out to the rest of the world. And just how massive are we talking? A full 20%. That means 1 out of every 5 barrels of petroleum used on the entire planet has to pass through this one tiny choke point. So yeah, when that gets shut down, the world doesn't just catch a cold, it gets a severe case of pneumonia. But here's what makes this whole 2026 scenario so terrifying. It's not just the sheer size of the disruption, it's the type of disruption. You see, this isn't a political embargo that leaders can negotiate their way out of. No, this is a physical blockade. The taps aren't just turned off, they are literally broken. To really put this into perspective, let's look back at the big energy crises we all know from history. You've got the 1973 embargo, the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Those events took about 4 or 5 million barrels per day off the market. And at the time, believe me, those shocks felt absolutely monumental. Okay, now look at the 2026 war. It takes 20 million barrels per day offline. This isn't just a little bigger. It's a completely different category of disaster. It's 4 times larger than those iconic shocks that brought the global economy to its knees back in the 70s. And you have to remember, this is not just about barrels of oil or numbers on a spreadsheet. Right at the epicenter of this crisis, it's about ships, it's about critical infrastructure, and it's about thousands of human lives that are just caught in the middle of it all. The numbers here are just staggering. You've got ships being damaged, crews abandoning their vessels. But the critical part? 20,000 seafarers on 2,000 ships are simply trapped inside the Persian Gulf. They can't get out. They have effectively become hostages of geography. And in this situation, geography is absolutely destiny. A country's entire fate depends on which side of the strait its ports are located. So you have Iraq, trapped inside, and its exports just collapse by 82%. But then look at Oman. Its ports are outside the choke point, so it becomes this tiny little release valve for a region under siege, and its exports actually increase by 16%. Now, you might be thinking, okay, once the fighting stops, you just turn the tops back on, right? Well, not so fast. As all the storage tanks fill up, producers are forced to shut down their wells. And restarting an oil well, it turns out, is not like flipping a light switch. It's a super complex, really expensive process that can take months, sometimes even years. And that's before we even get to the physical destruction. Key facilities like Qatar's massive natural gas hub at Ras Laffan are heavily damaged. The estimates? It's going to take 3 to 5 years to get them fully repaired. So this isn't some temporary supply issue. This is a long-term breakdown of global production capacity. So, with the epicenter completely paralyzed, a massive shockwave starts to radiate out across the global economy. And the first place it hits? The financial markets. The impact is, well, it's immediate. The reaction is just violent and instantaneous. Brent crude, that's the global benchmark, it skyrockets from under $80 to a peak of $126 a barrel, basically overnight. Sheer panic sets in. But this is where you see a really critical split between the paper markets and the real world. While investors were trading paper barrels, futures contracts, for about $110, anyone who needed an actual tanker of oil for delivery right now was paying close to $150 a barrel. That $40 difference, that's the price of pure, unadulterated desperation. This level of crises triggered something that had never been seen before. Governments around the world, through the International Energy Agency, got together and coordinated the largest emergency oil release in history. 400 million barrels pulled from their strategic reserves. And it was a truly global effort. The United States led the charge, contributing a massive 172 million barrels all on its own. Major importers like Japan and South Korea followed right behind, basically collectively dumping the world's emergency savings onto the market, just to prevent a total meltdown.
But even that couldn't stop the economic damage. The IMF put out a warning saying the world was teetering on the brink of recession. Back at the epicenter, countries like Qatar and Iran saw their economies shrimp by over 6 to 8%. And in Europe, energy-hungry industries like chemicals and steel faced shutdowns, sparking real fears of permanent deindustrialization.
Look, a crisis this big doesn't just cause a recession. It fundamentally reconfigures the world. It changes everything about how nations think about security, about power, and about the very nature of modern warfare itself. What this conflict really reveals is this fundamental shift in warfare. It's no longer a battle of pure firepower. It's a war of economic endurance. I mean, think about it. When a $20,000 drone can force you to fire a multi-million-dollar interceptor to stop it, the whole math of war changes. Victory doesn't go to the side with the fanciest tech anymore. It goes to the side that can simply afford to stay in the fight the longest. So in this brand new, much riskier world, what happens? Capital gets scared, and it flees. Investment money pulls out of the now dangerous Middle East and shifts towards the relative safety of the Western Hemisphere. Suddenly, producers like the US, Canada, Brazil, and Guyana become the new cornerstones of global energy security.
Now, this whole crisis makes the argument for renewable energy more powerful than ever, right? It's no longer just about the climate. It's a strategic security imperative. But as the world starts to pivot, it stumbles into a brand new geopolitical dilemma.
And here is the catch. The fastest, cheapest way to build out all that new solar and wind capacity relies on supply chains that are overwhelmingly dominated by one single country, China. So the world is left with this impossible choice. Do we trade a dependency on one region's fossil fuels for dependency on another's renewable technology? Ultimately, this all brings us to the core lesson of this entire 2026 crisis. You see, for decades, the world was obsessed with the price of energy. But what this event proved once and for all is that the real vulnerability isn't the price. It's the physical resilience of the system itself, the ships, the pipelines, and its choke points that we all just take for granted. And that's the question the 2026 crisis really leaves us with. In this complex, interconnected world we've built, our greatest strengths are also our greatest vulnerabilities. And this whole scenario forces us to ask a really tough question. What do we do when the very systems that power our civilization just stop working?